You hear the name Roxy Music, and what comes to mind? For most of us, it's pure 70s art rock glamour. You know, those futuristic sounds and absolutely iconic album covers. But what if I told you that the band's own frontman doesn't actually think they were a band at all? Yeah, let's get into this.
I mean, to the whole world, they were the complete package. From their look to their sound, they were one of the most original, most influential groups of their time. It was like they just fell through a time warp from the future, totally miles ahead of everyone else in 1972. Just a perfect mix of art school cool and rock and roll power. Okay, but this is where the story gets really interesting. Because Bryan Ferry, the super suave singer right at the center of it all, he had a totally different take on what Roxy Music was. And his definition, well, it pretty much challenges everything we thought we knew about them.
So what did Ferry think he was leading if it wasn't a band? The answer is right there in his own words. And it completely reframes how we should be looking at their music and their entire legacy.
And there you have it, straight from the man himself. Not a band, but a repertory company. Now the big question here is, what on earth does that even mean when you're talking about a rock and roll band? All right, let's break this down a bit. A traditional band, right, we usually think of it as a fixed unit, a gang, like the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. But a repertory company, like you'd see in the theater world, has a core director, that's Ferry, who brings in different actors, or in this case, different musicians, for different productions or different albums.
And here's where you can really see the genius in Ferry's approach. With those more fixed members, guys like guitarist Phil Manzanera and sax player Andy Mackay, you build this incredibly deep creative relationship. As Ferry himself said, you get to a point where speech becomes unnecessary. It's all about that unspoken, almost telepathic musical connection.
Now let's look at how this philosophy actually played out in the real world, because it wasn't just some abstract concept. It had a massive impact on the way Roxy Music's sound changed over time, especially after one particularly intense early album. So, the way Ferry saw it, the band had kind of painted themselves into a corner with the super complex, high-energy sound on their album For Your Pleasure. He felt like after doing that frantic thing, it was time to just relax a little. And the thing that sparked that change, ironically, was a project he did completely on his own. That project was his very first solo album, These Foolish Things. And honestly, this was a total game changer. By recording other people's songs and working with all these cool professional studio musicians, Ferry got a whole new perspective on how to actually make a record. He said it himself. He became more experienced and more self-assured. And what does that kind of confidence get you? It lets you simplify. You don't have to clutter everything up anymore. You don't need to hide behind a giant wall of sound. And you can hear this new, polished approach all over their next albums, like Stranded, which they recorded just a few months later. So with this new, sophisticated, refined sound, you'd think they were on track for total world domination. But there was one huge market that just remained a complete puzzle for Roxy Music, and it ended up becoming a really surprising source of motivation for them. And that puzzle, of course, was the United States. Ferry even talked about the initial American reluctance to subscribe to the whole Roxy thing. They'd be over there touring, and they were painfully aware that nobody was playing their records on the radio. They felt like they were on the outside looking in. But here's the key part. Instead of getting discouraged and giving up, Ferry and the band used that struggle as fuel. It became a new challenge, what Ferry called a fresh reason for making records. The whole game became, how do we crack the American code without losing who we are? And this is a really important point to make, because a lot of critics at the time accused them of selling out, of watering down their unique sound just to get a hit in America. But Ferry, he angrily denies this. He was adamant that the change in their sound was about his own growth as a producer and an artist, not some calculated cash grab. Okay, so let's tie all this together. We've got a group that doesn't really see itself as a group, a sound that changes because of a solo project, and a creative drive that's fueled by a foreign market they can't conquer. So what does all this really mean for the legacy of Roxy Music? When you get right down to it, Bryan Ferry ran Roxy Music less like a democratic rock band and more like a high-fashion brand or a movie director's production company. It was really a vehicle for his singular, evolving, artistic vision, and he used a core and sometimes rotating cast of amazing collaborators to bring that vision to life. And that kind of leaves us with the big question that Roxy Music still poses today. Was this some revolutionary new model for what a band could be? A flexible, creative unit built to last?
Or was it just a clever way to justify one man's absolute creative control? The answer, I think, is probably hidden somewhere inside their incredible, timeless music.